I don't know about you, but it sure seems like natural disasters are in the news a lot. Last week there was tornadoes in Bangladesh. I didn't even know they had tornadoes there. And some of these actually occur very close to home. Last fall we had Superstorm Sandy. It caused images I think that many of us will never forget. New York City and New Jersey. Of course, the Joplin tornado a couple years ago. All of these things, I think we need to do something about it. And with the world's population growing, more and more people moving into the coastal cities where a lot of the risks actually are, and with climate change impacts, I think we need to do something. I think we can. My focus is on wind, hurricanes, and tornadoes. I'll never forget my first hurricane. It was 2005 in July, 1 month before Hurricane Katrina. I have colleagues at the University of Florida. Well, they're actually friends. They chase the storms, and they put instruments up to measure wind speeds and other aspects of the hurricanes and gather data. And in my work in the wind tunnel, I set up anemometers and equipment all the time. But I'll never forget setting up anemometers in the hurricane because I had to have people actually supporting me to do it. The wind was so intense. I'll never forget the sting of the rain on my face. I'll never forget when the emergency personnel already left because it was too dangerous and we were still there setting up instruments because we wanted to get data. It was actually my first time on a beach in Florida. And I'll never forget driving out. I know a little bit about aerodynamics, driving a truck at 70 miles an hour when the wind gusts are 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, and the adrenaline rush of that. My wife calls it testosterone research. My second day on a beach in Florida was more what you'd expect in some ways. It was sunny, the sand was white, but there was chaos. The day before, the beach had been a couple hundred meters from the road in this image, but all the sand seemed to have moved and the water was much closer to the road. The sand was now in the town. There was buildings destroyed. Hard to believe. I'm used to seeing, I think we're all used to seeing images from war-torn parts of the world. Syria's in the news these days. And you see buildings that look like this. This was done by a hurricane. I remember talking to a woman there, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. She lived inland a little bit. Her house was fine, but she was coming to check out where she worked. She worked in a restaurant on the beach, and it was gone. She was unemployed now. Had a huge impact on me. Since then, I've been able to see many disasters and do investigations following many storms, and I'm always astounded by the chaos of it. There's always a mess. It feels surreal. You kind of feel like you're on a movie set and the director's gone a bit too far, putting too many 2x4s through steel that you think that can't happen, but it's real and we see it. There's a few things that we see though when we start to dig into the details. There's patterns that occur. The windborne debris is astounding, like in this truck. And is very dangerous. One of the things we've discovered in our wind tunnel work is that a piece of plywood will travel at 60 or 70% of the wind speed in the storm. So if you're in a tornado and there's 200-kilometer-an-hour winds, a piece of plywood could be traveling 130, 140 kilometers an hour. Wouldn't want to get hit by that. A lot of deaths are caused by flying debris. Houses are also susceptible to these things. Their roofs in particular are susceptible. So what tends to happen is the roof fails, it enters the wind field and hits other structures downstream, and you have problems. Also, when the roof comes off, it becomes much more dangerous for the people that may have been sheltering in their house during the storm, because once the roof's off, the walls are very vulnerable. So keeping the roofs on is important. Well, these are the patterns that we see. These people were unfortunate and lost their house in a storm. And one of the things that we observe is that there's sometimes seemingly random patterns that occur in the storms. This is their neighbor's house. They just lost some shingles. What happened? Why were these people just unlucky, or did something else happen? So we actually have to look at the details. In this case, their door blew in. It might have been hit by a piece of debris, or perhaps the latch failed, but it's a little tiny detail if you think about it. And when the wind rushes in, it fills the house up like a balloon. Okay, and it pushes it up. The wind's blowing over the roof. It wants to lift the roof. The pressure blowing in fills it up, and the roof goes off. Okay, we see this commonly. If we have debris breaking a window or breaking a garage door or pushing the front door in, that's often when roofs come off. So it's not just random. It's based on these other things, and little details seemingly matter. My students are tenacious when they go and look at the damage. They go and find the roof wherever it landed. And they went and found parts of this roof. And one of the things that we observed that may have also played a role is there wasn't enough nails holding the roof onto the walls. So there's little bits of important things, little things that we don't really think about every day. Nails holding roofs down, door latches, windows. These are the things that keep our houses intact. Big details matter too. This is on the Gulf Coast. It's a dangerous area. The storm surge in hurricanes is enormous. Here, this was Hurricane Ike. It wiped out entire neighborhoods, entire communities, except these houses. Was this random? Actually, it's not random. This is a success story. These houses were engineered to a higher standard. Their homeowners paid a little bit more, and they actually built them. So they put the houses up on stilts, high enough so that the large amount of water that comes with the hurricane flowed underneath. If you look carefully, you'll see that the stairs aren't there. They all washed away, so they'll have to get ladders to enter their house after the storm. But it was intact. Little details inside, also engineered, help make these houses safe and withstand the terrible storm. The others you can see were absolutely devastated that weren't built to this standard. So we can do things. Back to that beach in Florida in 2005. 2 buildings. These are side by side. I'm not kidding you. These are 2 buildings side by side. What's the difference? One's completely destroyed. One looks perfect. There's actually a few pieces of flashing missing, so it wasn't perfect, but almost. The difference? They're built to a different standard, obviously. It was after Hurricane Andrew devastated Miami in 1992, Florida changed their building code, and they started taking into account high winds. And the building on the left here, it was built to that higher standard. The building on the right was an older building, and it, you can see, was devastated. The walls are off, people's lives are on display, their home is ruined. So building codes can make a difference. If we want to do things about housing, it's a little bit more than that. So what I want to talk about is what can we do? To understand that, we have to look at how wind actually acts. So how does wind act on a house? Well, let's imagine turning our house upside down. Think about the house you live in. Imagine hanging weights on the roof and then shaking it like hell. That's really what the wind is doing. Normally when we think about our houses and you think about the roof, you think, well, I don't want it to fall down on me. A well-built house, the roof should not collapse. In a windstorm, we have to think exactly the opposite. We have to think we have to hold that thing down. I have a video that shows this. We actually wind tunnel test houses and buildings. We've been doing so for quite a while. This shows the pressures that act on the surface of a building. This is a building with a flat roof. And what the pressure is simply just the force applied over a small area. So if you add up the pressures over the whole surface, that's the force the building has to withstand. And you can see in the corner, the wind forces are high. Along the edges, they're relatively high compared to the middle of the roof. It wants to peel the roof back. You can see that it's moving and changing. When you're out in the wind, you feel the gustiness. The building responds to that gustiness too. Every once in a while, there's a huge pattern of the load increasing, and then it decreases again just as quickly. This is what buildings need to withstand. We need to think about holding them down. Here's one way to do it. This is in southern Spain in the mountains. I lived a couple years in Spain. And architecturally, I'm not sure this is really what we want to do with our houses. It's not the solution I would recommend. What we do in Canada is we hold our houses down with nails. So again, if you think about holding your roof upside down, it's the nails that hold it in place, right? It's the nails that are withstanding it. These nails, they're not very strong for this purpose. They're perfectly good if we have a big snow load, but they're not great when we have a severe windstorm. There's actually technology to solve this problem, developed for hurricanes, called hurricane straps. It's just a thin piece of metal. You wrap it over top of the truss, and you connect it directly to the walls. It increases the strength of the house immensely. It's like a seat belt for your roof. Okay? None of us would get in a car these days and not put a seat belt on. This is the seat belt for our houses, if you will. Nails are important. If you look in this picture, you see a lot of the panels have come off. This is the size of nail that we need in Canada to hold roof sheathing on. Okay? It's okay, but every time I go and look at damage, I see roof panels off. Piece of plywood on your roof. You don't think about it very much, right? If it comes off, research has shown that you're most likely to lose the contents of your house from all the rain coming in. So one piece of plywood makes a huge difference to how you live. It might be in no danger, but you're losing your possessions. And our homes are where we shelter. It's where we live. It's where our memories are. It's where our family and friends are. If we use a nail this size, let's compare them. This nail is the code requirement in Canada. This is a nail that's half an inch longer. If we use this nail that's half an inch longer, we actually double the strength of the roof sheathing. It takes twice the force to pull it off. How much does that cost? That difference over the cost of a roof? I don't know, I can't calculate it, it's so small, the difference. Okay, and if you double the strength of the roof sheathing, it increases the wind speeds by 40% that cause failure. So if you're in a storm and it's 100-mile-an-hour winds that takes that sheathing off, if you use the half-inch bigger nail, it's 140 miles an hour. That's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. It means that we can actually design houses for tornadoes. When I tell people that, they often shake their head. But 90% of tornadoes, I think people think of the Joplin tornado, which was horrific, and we're not going to really do anything about those really horrific events, but I think we can reduce the damage in them as well. But if we actually, 90-95% of tornadoes, we could actually deal with just by changing nails and putting the hurricane straps on the roof ties. We would keep the roofs on and keep houses much more intact and reduce the number of deaths that occur in these events. So we've done a lot of work in the lab. I talked about seat belts for your house. We actually wind tunnel test houses. One of the things we do, in the modern society, we wind tunnel test cars, right, to get better gas mileage, more fuel-efficient cars. We can wind tunnel test houses to make them more disaster resilient. And the results also explain some of that variability that we see in storms. This is the Barrie tornado. It was a terrible event, 1985, an F4, which is a very severe tornado. Many people, unfortunately, lost their lives in this event. It looks like chaos. Again, you see the roofs off the houses, walls collapsed. It's pretty severe damage. But in the background, there's a bunch of houses that just lost their shingles. Okay, you think about it, well, there's randomness in tornadoes. Our wind tunnel work actually explains this. Hip roofs are more aerodynamic than a gable roof. A hip roof has 4 surfaces. A gable roof is the kind of simple structure you draw as a child with just 2 surfaces on it. A hip roof's more aerodynamic. It gets better gas mileage, if you will, right? And it's also stronger. Gable roofs have only connections on 2 walls. Hip roofs, they go around all 4 walls, so it's better structurally. If you're in a tornado, you'd much rather be in a hip-roofed house than a gable-roofed house. How many of you would think about that when you buy it? You don't. But this is something we can do. We're already building houses like this, and they're more disaster resilient. So with some very easy steps, there's a lot of things we can do to make our houses, make our communities much more resilient, even for things as extreme as tornadoes. And we can save lives, and we can save the lost costs. And as more and more of us move into cities, as the previous speaker mentioned, we're going to have to deal with this more and more. As we have larger and larger population, the hazards aren't going anywhere. We're putting more infrastructure at risk. I believe we need to do something, and I believe we can, and I believe we can afford it. And what I hate to see is when history repeats itself. This is from the same community, 1969 Hurricane Camille, 2005 Hurricane Katrina, the same neighborhood, the same result. We don't have to let that happen. We can learn from our history, we can learn from these observations, and we can build more disaster-resilient communities. We just need to act. Thank you.